Imagine a world where the greatest empire in history never collapsed. Not politically, not militarily, and most importantly, not economically. No dark ages, no lost knowledge, no broken roads and burned libraries. Just one empire, one currency, one gigantic economy stretching across continents. What if the Roman Empire never fell economically? Let's imagine that timeline. This story begins in the 3rd century when the real Roman Empire was in serious trouble. In our history, Rome was bleeding money. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Emperors kept debasing the silver coins, mixing them with cheaper metals. Prices exploded. Taxes were brutal and chaotic. Trade shrank. People stopped trusting the money in their own hands. The empire didn't fall in one day. It slowly rotted from the inside. But in our alternate world, something different happens. Instead of panicking and printing more bad money, a group of emperors and advisors actually understands economics. They realize that an empire cannot survive on fake silver and desperate taxes. So they change the rules. First, they fix the currency. They introduce a stable gold coin with a strict weight and purity, and they make a law. No emperor is allowed to change it. If you mess with the money, you are not just breaking policy, you're committing treason. Merchants, soldiers, and farmers can now trust that a coin minted today will still have value 20 years from now. Inflation slows down, trade slowly recovers, prices become predictable again, money becomes boring, and that's exactly what a strong currency should be. Second, they reform taxes. In our timeline, Roman taxes pushed people off their land. Collectors were corrupt. The poor paid more than the rich. Whole regions stopped producing because it wasn't worth the effort. In our alternate Rome, the state creates a simple, standardized tax system based on land, trade, and income. You know exactly how much you will pay every year. And in exchange, the empire guarantees roads, security, courts, and grain supplies. Local communities can keep a slice of their taxes to fund schools, aqueducts, and local infrastructure. The empire stops behaving like a robber and starts acting like an investor. Third, they protect trade instead of choking it. Real Rome taxed every border and every city gate. Merchants lost time and money on checkpoints and bribes. Our alternate Rome makes a radical decision. Inside the empire, there are no internal tariffs. Once goods enter the empire, they can move freely from Spain to Syria without extra charges. Roman roads and sea routes become something new, a unified internal market, a kind of ancient European Union, but much bigger and much earlier. Caravans from the east, grain ships from Africa, glass from Syria, wine from Gaul, all of it circulates inside one gigantic economic body. The richer trade becomes, the more taxes Rome collects, without raising tax rates. Fourth, they invest in people. Instead of spending everything on palaces and parades, the emperors start funding public education. At first it's basic, reading, writing, arithmetic, Roman law. But over the centuries, it grows into something more like a public school system. In big cities, the empire pays scholars to teach engineering, astronomy, navigation, medicine, and philosophy. Talented kids from poor families can study for free in exchange for serving the state as engineers, administrators, or military officers later. The empire is no longer just a collection of conquered peoples. It becomes a talent factory. So what happens after these economic reforms? By the year 500, when the Western Empire collapsed in our real history, this alternate Rome is still standing. Its borders are smaller than at its absolute peak, but its economy is stronger. The Mediterranean Sea is still a Roman lake. Cities like Rome, Alexandria, Carthage, Constantinople, Antioch, and Lugdunum, modern Lyon, hum with workshops, markets, and shipyards. Instead of crumbling stone ruins, we see maintenance crews fixing roads, bridges, and aqueducts as part of normal state spending. The empire is not perfect. There is corruption, there are power struggles, there are bad emperors, but the system is strong enough to survive them. The economy doesn't collapse. It absorbs the damage and keeps going. Now here is where history really splits. In our world, when Rome fell, Europe fragmented into small kingdoms. Feudal lords, castles, endless local wars, and centuries of lost growth. In the Roman survives timeline, that never happens. There is no empty space for feudalism to grow into, no vacuum for warlords to fill. So instead of knights and castles, we get something else. Larger cities, bigger markets, and early versions of corporations. Merchant houses in Carthage and Alexandria start financing trade voyages. They lend money to ship captains. They spread risks over many voyages. They keep written accounts for decades. In other words, early banking appears inside a living Roman legal framework, not in small scattered Italian city-states. By the year 1000, while our real Europe was just starting to wake up from the early Middle Ages, alternate Rome is already experimenting with something close to industrial thinking. Roman engineers know about water wheels, gears, and steam. In our world, the idea of using steam power was discovered, but not applied seriously. In this alternate world, the empire is rich enough and stable enough to invest in experiments. A single engineer building a steam-powered pump for mines is interesting. An empire building thousands of them is world-changing. So mining productivity jumps. More metal means better tools, better weapons, stronger buildings. By 1200, you might see entire districts of Rome filled with workshops powered by water wheels and mechanical devices, early factories in everything but name. Exploration also looks very different. In our timeline, Portugal and Spain started the Age of Discovery because they wanted spices, gold, and new trade routes. In the Roman timeline, the empire has been trading with India and maybe even China for many centuries already. Roman merchants know the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. Roman maps are better, their ships are bigger, and their navigation tools are more advanced. At some point, a Roman admiral will ask the same question as Columbus. What if we sail west instead of east? But unlike Columbus, he does this with the full support of a massive state treasury and a standing navy. Roman expeditions cross the Atlantic. They reach the Americas not as a single risky voyage, but as a series of organized, state-funded missions. When they build ports on distant shores, they don't plant Spanish flags or Portuguese crosses. They build Roman-style harbors, forums, and tax offices. Instead of many colonial empires competing, we might get a single, unified Roman colonial system. Economically, that changes everything. Now let's jump forward. By the 1500s in our timeline, Europe was entering the age of banks, stock exchanges, and early capitalism. In the Roman survives timeline, the empire has had centuries to refine its financial tools. You might walk into a marble building in Rome that works almost like a modern central bank. Inside, officials manage the money supply, set interest rates for state-backed loans, and stabilize prices between distant provinces. Merchants in Britannia can transfer money to merchants in Egypt using written orders honored by state banks, the ancestor of modern wire transfers. The solidus, the gold coin of Rome, becomes the closest thing to a world reserve currency. If you're a merchant in India, a tribe leader near the Danube, or a city-state ruler on the shores of East Africa, you accept Roman coins. Why? Because the empire that backs them has never defaulted. By the 1700s in our world, the Industrial Revolution kicked off in Britain. In the alternate timeline, this revolution starts much earlier, and inside the Roman Empire. Huge steam-powered factories rise near major rivers. Textile production is mechanized. Ironworks scale up to levels our real history didn't see until centuries later. Roman engineers experiment with railways to connect ports and mining areas. Soon you can travel from Rome to Alexandria by a combination of steamship and rail, fast, predictable, and cheap. The empire becomes not just a political giant, but an economic superorganism that covers half the planet. How would everyday life look under such a system? If you are a citizen in a Roman province, you might use a state-backed identity document, pay taxes through a local office that sends data to a central administration, use coins and paper notes printed in Rome, travel within the empire without passports, only with proof of citizenship, invest your savings in long-term state projects, roads, dams, lighthouses, shipyards, and receive interest. In other words, you live in something that looks surprisingly modern, but based on marble columns and Latin inscriptions. But would this world actually be better? Economically, yes, at least for most. There would likely be less extreme poverty, fewer small wars, and a higher average level of technology and medicine. Public health would improve through organized aqueducts, sewage systems, and medicine funded by the state. However, there is a price. A unified empire means unified control. The same system that keeps the roads safe can also track your behavior, your taxes, your debts, and your political opinions. There is no another country to run to if you dislike the laws. There is only Rome, everywhere. Rebellions still happen, but they are local and quickly crushed by a well-funded, well-equipped army. Economically, Rome reduces risk. Politically, it reduces freedom. And what about the global financial system? In our world, international finance is messy. We have dollars, euros, yen, dozens of central banks, interest rate shocks, debt crises, currency wars. In the Roman world, there is one dominant currency and one dominant central authority. Crises still happen. Droughts, plagues, bad harvests, trade disruptions. But the empire can spread the shock across its huge territory. If Egypt has a bad harvest, grain from North Africa or Spain can replace it. If one province falls into recession, state spending can move there to stabilize employment. It's not a perfect system, but it's much more coordinated than our patchwork of competing governments. Now jump all the way to today. It is the 21st century of the Roman calendar. The empire never fell economically. It automatized its tax system, digitized its accounts, and built global data networks long before anyone else. You live in a world with Roman-branded smartphones, satellites launched from Roman spaceports, and financial markets regulated by the Senate's Economic Council. Latin phrases are everywhere, in brand names, in the names of corporations, in legal documents. You might work for a company called Mercurius Global Logistics or Imperium Capital Holdings. You pay your bills in digital solidi from an imperial bank account. And somewhere in the old city of Rome, under domes and marble arches, a group of officials meets regularly to adjust interest rates for an empire of billions. So what does this all mean? If the Roman Empire never fell economically, humanity might have. Earlier industrialization, much faster technological progress, a single global currency, and a unified legal and financial system. We'd probably be richer, healthier, and more technologically advanced. Maybe we would already have cities on Mars, named after Roman gods. But we would also live under a long, unbroken shadow. 2,000 years of the same empire, the same institutions, the same flag. The fall of Rome in our world created chaos, but also competition. That competition between kingdoms, cities, and ideas pushed Europe to innovate, to fight, and eventually to build modern capitalism and democracy. In the Roman survives timeline, there is less chaos and more order, less risk, and maybe fewer big leaps of creativity. So would this eternal Roman Empire be a dream of stability, or a golden cage built out of marble, law, and money? We'll never know for sure. But one thing is clear. When Rome fell, the world lost not just an empire, it lost an economic machine powerful enough to change the entire future of humanity. And if that machine had never stopped, our history and our wallets would look very, very different.